Yellow and Red makes by Digits 27, Chapter 38. Naruto finished the last brushstroke over the seal in front of him. With a quick infusion of his own chakra, the seal glowed brightly and quickly dissolved before taking the one below it as well. At first, he had underestimated the complexity of the seal he had been working on, nearly killing himself in the process. Luckily, the rebels had a skilled medic on hand that prevented him from doing so. After that, he had fixed his mistake, and with some help from Mei, he had successfully removed the seal from his own arm. However, unlike all the people he went on to help afterwards, he didn't completely remove the seal. He merely deactivated it. He did so because he found one aspect of the seal to be strange. Instead of nullifying his chakra completely, like its counterpart in Hozuki Jo, it merely prevented a shinobi from using it. The chakra was still there, swirling beneath the surface like a dammed river. Naruto just couldn't mold it. If he used it for trading purposes, then he could expand his own reserves, while at the same time learning not to be as dependent of his chakra in case something like this happened again. Thanks, kid. The man he had been working on stood up and flexed his muscles to get some feeling back into them as chakra rushed through his system once again. Naruto was annoyed by the name everyone around here kept giving him, but he couldn't help but be happy at the relieved and thoughtful expression the people got when he removed their invisible bindings. He looked over at Mei expectantly, but the woman just shook her head. That was the last one, Naruto. You got rid of all the seals from the people we currently have in the base. I've sent word to our other outposts with the instructions you gave us, and people will get to work with them over there. She walked over, sitting on the chair that had previously been vacated by all of Naruto's patients. You have no idea how much you helped us, kid. With all those bloodlines in use again, we finally have some heavy hitters back, and it's going to take a while for Yagura to come up with the new seal. Fujitsu masters are rare throughout the elemental nations. Naruto just nodded, always happy to help. Before, his own Fujitsu expertise was just for himself. However, when he used it to actually help other people, he felt a rush from his core that he couldn't explain, but it felt good. He just smiled happily at the leader of the rebellion, who worked around in thought for a few moments. She also kept glancing at Naruto, peering at him as if there was something she was supposed to see, but couldn't quite. Anyway, kid, you held up your side of the bargain, so now I'll hold up mine. She motioned for him to stand, and they walked through the underground base, passing lit torches and many of the rebels. A few were training, others were playing cards as card games or shogi to pass the time, but all of them sent respectful nods towards Mei as she passed. Naruto even blushed slightly when he realized a few of the nods were in his direction. Respect wasn't something he was used to, and it unnerved him slightly. Don't worry, kid. The weight of leadership is a heavy burden, but when you help people, you can't help but earn their respect. Naruto blushed again. Mei hadn't even turned when she talked, but she had obviously noticed the nods and respect gazes as well. I'm not exactly the type to be respected. Mei just smirked as they carried on walking. The passageway and tunnels of the compound were winding, and Naruto would have easily gotten lost if he didn't have a guide. Oh, and why is that? Naruto just hung his head a little, looking away from Mei so she wouldn't see the look over his face. It's nothing. I'm more used to fear and hatred than respect, so it feels weird. Mei stopped mid-step, turning to look at him curiously. Now, why would a kid like you be feared or hated? You're not even old enough to have earned that kind of ire. Naruto just sneered in annoyance, thinking back over his childhood before reminding himself that was all behind him. Trust me, age has nothing to do with it. Without saying any more, Naruto kept walking, prompting Mei to follow on behind him. Now rather curious about the blonde that had been brought to her, she led him into a large technical room filled with plotting boards and maps, with a few people looking over them and discussing various strategies. Mei ignored them as she made her way over to one of the more expansive maps, filled with small models representing troop deployments and unit locations, as well as the defenses on certain areas. Alright, kid, if what you said is true, then your friend will more than likely have been taken here. She pointed to a small dot on the map out in the middle of nowhere. That middle of nowhere, quite far behind what could be considered the enemy's line. It's a large camp that's been lovingly dubbed Gyu no Matsubi. Naruto shivered at the name, and the line didn't exactly sound very pleasant, and he understood the irony when considering who was kept there. We've been trying to launch a hit on the place for about a year now, but it's too far into Yagura's territory to take a sizable force. Sorry, kid, but if you go there, my men can't go with you. I can't even offer a few of my tuning. They'll be pretty much walking to their deaths. Naruto just nodded in understanding. He couldn't ask to rid this woman of some of her vital forces, and taking a joining would never have been out of the question. Would have been out of the question. Which is why I'll be going with you instead. Naruto just stared at her in shock, his eyes wide and unblinking at the offer. But why? Mei just smiled at Naruto warmly, not an expression she was used to from people in her generation. You still have no idea what you've done for us, kid. With that seal neutralized, we finally have a breath of a chance at winning this war. It's been drawing out for far too long, and my men have been mired down in it for even longer. If I go with you and we take out that camp, then we'll have struck a major victory over that bastard Yagura. She looked at him sternly, but her eyes still held warmth. You've paid not only me, but all the men who fight daily for their freedom a great debt, and I always repay my debts, no matter the cost. Naruto was still looking at her incredulously. But you're the leader here. If you don't make it back, what will happen to the rebellion? Mei smiled again, this time more out of pride. You'll learn something, kid, that an idea is a lot stronger than the individual. It doesn't matter if I die out there, someone will just take my place. As long as there are still people willing to fight against the bigotry and ignorance, there will be a rebellion. She smirked, looking down at him confidently. Anyway, don't you think I can handle myself? Naruto spluttered a bit, unsure of what to say that wouldn't dig him deeper into the debt he was making. Wisely, he chose to say nothing and just looked at Mei expectantly. Good. Then we should leave immediately. It's just turning dark, so we'll have all night to make it to Gyo no Matsubi. Naruto just nodded in defeat. The woman made a strong argument, and if she was the leader of the rebellion against Kage no less, then she must be strong. He sighed as she went over the plan to him. In his sigh quickly turned into a smile at the thought of finally getting food back. Fu was growing incredulously bored as the large group of people slowly made their way through the dark forest. She had grown a taste for free running in her time with Naruto, and being relegated back down to just walking through the forest at such a lethargic pace was irritating. She wished she had paid more attention when Naruto had excitedly gone on about Funjutsu, but to Fu it just looked like a load of squiggles on a page. She could have gotten rid of those unknowing seals, and they could have already made it to where they were going. So where are we going anyway? Currently, she was walking alongside the man who had told them he had a place they could go. She had found out his name was Eo, and he was a part of the rebellion working against Yagura's regime. That alone had put him in Fu's good books. After everything she had heard about the bloodline purge, he had gotten captured because his partner had betrayed him while they were on a two-man mission to free some of the very prisoners he now resided amongst. He had killed the man, but not before his accomplices managed to subdue him with the seal. There's a small base not too far from our location where we can regroup with the rebellion. After that, we can make our way to Mei-sama's position and return to helping her however we can. He sighed and he looked down at the seal around his bicep, the pain of losing his chakra obviously getting to him. Don't worry about it. If I can find my Oni-san, he can get rid of that seal. He's great with them. Ao still looked downcast. He obviously didn't find the words encouraging. That or he believed that Naruto was probably dead. He gave her a veiled smile to try and relieve the girl's worry before he went back to looking ahead and scouting out their path. For a while, Fu had wanted to ask about the eye patch, and the way he moved suggested he might have only recently lost the eye, or at least the vision in it. She decided against it. Usually topics like that were a sore subject for most. She sighed again to herself, wondering where Naruto could be, banishing the nagging voice at the back of her mind, telling her that he had abandoned her, left her like everyone else in her life. She didn't believe such things anymore. Naruto was family, and family didn't abandon one another, so she wouldn't give up hope. Where are you, Oni-san? Naruto stopped, coming to a slow crouch on the branch he had hopped onto, quickly followed by Mei. He had to physically avert his eyes when he noticed the way her impressive bust bounced slightly when she jumped from tree to tree. She had caught him looking nice. She had caught him looking nice, but said nothing, deciding to take it as a compliment. She wasn't sure if that made her vain or needy, but she didn't really care. In her opinion, Naruto looked like the type that would grow into an attractive young man, and to get the kind of unspoken compliment made her feel young. Plus, he was being somewhat of a gentleman by trying not to look so she could forgive him. They stopped because they had come to the edge of a large clearing, at the center of which stood an equally large compound. It was surrounded on all sides by a chain-like fence, no doubt reinforced with chakra to prevent it from simply being crushed. This was Gyo no Matsubi, and it made Naruto's stomach churn just looking at it. Mainly, it was composed of a few low buildings that formed one side of the compound, and at the other stood a veritable sea of cages, all pressed up against one another. Currently, Naruto was dressed up in a dark blue flak jacket with a standard camouflage pants of a Kirigakure shinobi. He might have mistaken for one if it wasn't for his headband and bright blonde hair. If blonde hair was a rarity in Konoha and more so in Suna, then it was almost unheard of in the land of water. In fact, the only place that it was actually somewhat common was Kumakakure. Naruto had seen more than a few blondes in his time there. Other than that, he had only seen Tsunade in the Yamanakas, to say otherwise. Focusing less on his possible heritage and more on the task at hand, Naruto made quick work in scouting out the encampment. There was a large contingent of guards, most likely between Jonin and Chunin, consistently moving about the outer walls. Some even had nin dogs that would make it almost impossible to sneak up on the camp conventionally. Luckily, nothing Naruto ever did could be considered conventionally, and he managed to see the glaring weakness in the camp's defenses. Mesama, if you would let me, I believe I can disable the guard quickly enough and allow you entry into the compound. Mei just looked at him dumbfounded. He had already proven proficient in Fujitsu, an art that some men found impossible to even grasp the basics of. But even so, he was only 15. She found it difficult to believe that he could have an easy way of getting into such a high-level compound that even Mei found slightly intimidating. What are you planning? Naruto just smirked, placing a finger against his nose in an I'm not telling manner. You'll see. With that, he unsealed a few kunai, 3 in each hand, and Mei gasped as she recognized their design. She was about to comment when Naruto sent the special weapons sailing into the air on a trajectory that would take them over the walls of the camp, but not particularly in the direction of any of the guards. Naruto quickly formed a seal in his hand and whispered gently, multi-shadow kunai jutsu. Instantly, the 6 thrown weapons sailed through the air, becoming 60, each landing without even a whisper of a sound all throughout the base. Still stunned that such a young boy could make a technique like that, Mei almost didn't notice when Naruto vanished from his spot on the branch beside her. Of course she did. One did not become leader of a rebellion without having that kind of awareness. Nothing could be heard from the direction of the encampment except the normal sounds of the nindog sniffing about outside the wall. Mei heard a strange whine as one of the dogs found the kunai and were scared by it because it didn't have any scent whatsoever. That whine turned into a brief but high-pitched yelp as the dog and its master found themselves on the floor, bleeding from a gash on their neck and unable to cry out for help. Mei may have been around in time of the Yondem Hokage, but she hadn't ever seen his technique in use. Only Iwa and a few Kumo ninja had ever had the honor. Now she understood why it was so feared. The attack, if one could call it that, was over in a matter of minutes, with Naruto silently moving about the camp without having to take a single step. killing anybody that didn't have the suppression seal. Soon, he stood in the center of the open area between the cages and the buildings, panting from the exertion of using the Fuji no Iki so much. The sharpened kunai in his hands were slowly dripping blood to the ground as he stared around at the death and destruction he had caused. Naruto had killed before on his first mission to deal with some bandits, in fact, but never on this scale. He managed to make it over to the main gates of the facility and opened them before falling to the ground and just staring at his hands. May walked over almost hesitantly. She had seen some atrocities, as is only natural in a war, but seeing a young boy like that mercilessly slaughter an entire camp of shinobi was something she would never forget. She looked at him, sat up against a chain link fence of the camp, staring at the blood splatters on his hands like he could will them to vanish. She moved over to his side, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder as he forced him to look into her emerald eyes. Naruto, you did what you had to do. He nodded slowly, almost mechanically, as if he wasn't really registering what she was saying. At least he hadn't gone into shock. Although worryingly that meant this was not his first skill. May had had her first skill at a much younger age, being raised in a war, but still nearly broke her heart seeing the innocent of children like Naruto being slowly drained away as the spark left their eyes. He hastily stood up as his shocked and unbelieving features slowly morphed back into his usual determined mask. He quickly hurried back over to the cages and found they were all locked. Normally that would pose no trouble as he could cut them open with wind jutsu, but he was exhausted from his use of the kunai. They were too sturdy to just be broken with brute force, but May was already on it. She walked up to one of the cages and breathed on the lock. A fine mist emerged from her lungs, and on contact with the lock it sizzled before completely melting away. Naruto looked on in surprise, wondering what kind of jutsu that was as she repeated the maneuver over and over until all the cages were lock free, and they stood before a small gathering of roughly 100 captured shinobi. A few seemed to recognize May and were giving their thanks for the rescue, but even more had seen what Naruto had done to their guards. Their faces were a mix between thanks, awe, and respect, which continued to make Naruto feel uncomfortable. He didn't like that these people were thanking him for killing others. What they were doing may have been disgusting and horrible, but they were still people. It didn't really matter to Naruto. He was too busy looking through the faces of the crowd for that shock of mint green hair he wanted to see. He couldn't spot Fu anywhere and even tried calling out to her with no response. May just looked at his hopeful but frantic calling with a saddened look on her face. Casualties were a sad but necessary horror in war, and she had lived too long in battle to have hopes that Naruto's friend was even alive. "Alright, people, don't stand around gawking. We need to get you out of here, alright?" Quickly, Naruto snapped out of his discomfort long enough to tug on May's sleeve, only to turn around in annoyance. "That may not be the best idea, May-sama." The older woman just looked at him curiously. "We only managed to reach here because of our tree running. If we were to go by foot, we would definitely get caught by all those patrols we came across, unless one of us was to take them out beforehand. If even one of them got away, we could be swarmed by Kiri troops." May thought about it and nodded quickly. "You're right, but we also can't stay here. For all we know, they have messengers coming to and fro to check up on the prisoners. We don't have enough time for you to remove all these people's seals. So what do you suggest?" Naruto just shrugged. "I may not be able to get rid of all of them right now, but I could do enough that we would at least have a small squad. That way, if we come across any patrols, we have a better chance of getting rid of them before any can inform somebody else." May nodded at the young boy's suggestion. For a 15-year-old, he was already showing incredible foresight and planning. "I also need to find where my kunai landed. I don't want others getting their hands on them." May nodded in agreement. The last thing she wanted was Kagura getting his hands on such a dangerous technique. "Speaking of which, kid, me and you are going to have a talk about what you did back there." Naruto just nodded dismissively. I could say the same thing. What was the technique you used to disable the locks? It wasn't any elemental transformation I've ever seen." May just smirked and held her finger up to her nose in the same manner Naruto had done minutes ago. "We all have our secrets, Naruto." Naruto just scowled. He hated being left out of the loop or being denied information. Alright, people, change of plans. I need those of you that have some kind of scouting or tracking ability, as well as those with a very powerful Kekkei Genkai, to step forward, and Naruto here is going to remove that seal. We don't have time for all of you, but we'll get that done once we get back to our base. A few people came forward, and Naruto made short work of their seal, having have plenty of practice back at May's base. Now, alongside May and Naruto, they had an ice wielder from the Yuki clan, a steel release user, someone with a strange dojutsu that made their eyes glow red when in use, and a storm release user. The unnamed dojutsu wielder took point with his ability to see through other objects and warned the others when a patrol was approaching. The steel release user would drop down in their midst, and when all their attacks failed on him, the storm release user would use him as a lightning rod to take out the patrol. The Yuki clan member, Mei, and Naruto just acted as support, cleaning up the stragglers that managed to get away. Naruto marveled at the Yuki clan member who said his name was Eki. His Genkai was frightening in use. Naruto remembered Haku from his mission in Wave, and in comparison, Haku might as well have been playing around with slush. Eki could harden the moisture in the air around his enemies, encasing them in ice without any prior notice, before shattering both the cocoon and his prisoner with a flick of his wrist. It turns out the Yuki clan was one of the hardest hit in the Bloodline Purges because of the feared powers they wielded, and Naruto was beginning to see why. A squad of ice users could decimate a small army if they were near a source of water. The more experienced one like Eki just used the moisture in the air, and in water country there was a lot to say the least. With this team dynamic, they actually made it back to the base in short time, leaving a trail of dead patrols in their wake with no survivors to tell Yagura what happened. The shock looked on the rebels' face when a small army of bloodline users marched through their hallways. They were followed by a very happy Mei and a less than happy Naruto. He had failed to find Fu, and she was still out there somewhere. He walked through the hallways, trailing after the group of freed prisoners, with his head hanging low and a defeated look in his eyes. Well, he did, until he was brought to the ground in a tight bear hug, which crushed the air from his lungs. Oni-san! Naruto somehow found himself on his back, lying on the cold stone floor, staring into a pair of bright sparkling orange eyes. Fu. She dived forward again, wrapped Naruto into a large hug, something she could actually accomplish now thanks to a small growth spurt. Almost as if he didn't believe it was true, Naruto thankfully returned the hug, wrapping the smaller girl up in his arms. Finally, they parted and Naruto could look at her properly. Her clothes were a little ragged and her wrist had red welts from where she had been bound, but most noticeably was the two large gashes in the back of her shirt, which told Naruto she had used her wings. Fu. But how? So Fu told Naruto everything of how she was captured, how she incited a small rebellion from the camp, which brought a small smile to Naruto's face, and of how she came up with a plan to escape using her two signature abilities. In all, Naruto was very proud of his younger sister. She had grown up a lot in the last year, but until now, Naruto didn't quite realize how much. When he looked at her, he still saw the same little frightened girl he had found in Takagakure. However, now he could plainly see the intelligent, strong young woman she was becoming, and he felt a little pride when he realized it was partly because of him. She finally allowed him to get off the floor when they heard Mei cough from where she was standing next to Eki. By now, Ao had rushed into the room, having been chasing a furious Fu all throughout the complex, and was getting a curious look from Mei. Ao, I thought you were on a mission with Shisako. And he hung his head in shame a little. I'm sorry, Mei-sama. I was betrayed by Shisakuo and handed over to the opposing forces. In fact, if it wasn't for that young girl, I would still be under their control and no doubt have been in Gao no Matsubi or one of the other slave camps by now. Mei raised an eyebrow in Fu's direction, who just blushed under the scrutiny. Funny, because me and Naruto over there were just at Gao no Matsubi, and now there is nobody there. The emphasis on the word told Ao everything that he needed to know about what had happened. He was a little shocked. That particular camp was infamous for being inescapable, and no attack so far had been able to seize it. He looked at Naruto curiously, wondering what the boy was capable of, but unable to truly examine him because of the seal around his arm. Is that right? Naruto just nodded, feeling strange under the searching eye of this man. Well, when Well, then you have our thanks. With that amount of bloodline users freed, we will surely have an advantage in future conflicts. Naruto just blushed under the praise. It was still too foreign for him. Fu just seemed excited to hear that she wasn't the only one that had an adventure during their separation, and hugged Naruto to tell her to and bugged Naruto to tell her more about it as they walked back through the corridors of the base. Come on, Oni-san. We have lots to talk. We have lots of time. Tell me about what you did. Naruto just smiled at her flustered features, enjoying having her back with him. Their time apart was too nerve-wracking, and he promised himself from that point he would never let her get too far from him ever again until he was sure she could handle herself. Fu, I already told you. Mei-sama told me that was where we might be. So where you might be. So we went there to rescue you and all the bloodline users that had been captured. Fu's eyes widened slightly as a single tear that could be seen trying to escape their watery confines. You did all that just to rescue me, even if you didn't know I was there for sure. Naruto just nodded, smiling softly as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Of course, Fu, I will never let anything bad happen to you as long as there is breath in my body. Fu smiled as well before returning to returned to contemplation as she took in her brother's kindly words. Ah, yes, if I may ask, how was it that a 15-year-old boy managed to infiltrate a high-level facility and rescue over 100 bloodline users without a single casualty? It was Eo who asked, and Naruto just smirked, trying not to appear smug, but from the way he said it, the accomplishment seemed even greater. He just unsealed one of his kunai and started swinging it by the ring around his finger. You know, a shinobi has to have secrets. Eo seemed to look at the tri-pronged kunai, then back at Naruto's face, then back at the weapon with incredible scrutiny. He didn't say anything else, but he did send a few questioning looks towards Mei, who simply sighed and shrugged expectantly. Anyway, let's do something about that seal around your arm. It must be getting annoying by now. Are you sure you have to move on? You would be a great help in this war. Mei seemed to rethink her words as she looked across at Naruto and Fu. And even greater help than you have already been. Naruto sadly shook his head, much to Mei's disappointment. I'm sorry, I have my own obligations, and one of those is to train and become stronger. I can't do that in the middle of a civil war. I would be fighting too much. I also wouldn't want Fu to see some of the things that happen in a war. Her innocence should be preserved as long as possible. Mei sadly nodded in agreement. After all, she had thought things along those lines. Even thinking about Naruto, Fu was even younger. I understand, but it is still a great shame. Know that when we win this war, you two will always be welcome in Kirikakure. Come by sometime to see us. And Naruto nodded with a smile, as did Fu. We owe you a debt for how you helped us, and remember, I always repay my debts. Naruto's smile broadened. They were just about to leave the rebel base, having spent a week there. Naruto was busy with removing everyone's restriction seals, and Fu even managed to make a few friends her age, most notably a young boy called Chojuro, who, in Naruto's opinion, had some serious confidence issues. They both weaved to the small gathering of rebel forces that had come to see them off, and turned to leave when the passageway was sealed off by the earth moving to cover it. So, where are we going now, Oni-san? Naruto just chuckled heartily to himself. You know, Fu, I think I've decided to stop planning these things. It never works anyway. End of chapter 38.